haunting woods. The sun hung low on the horizon as Jennifer, Mark, Lisa, and Tom drove up the winding dirt road to Pine Ridge National Park. An idyllic plan had formed over countless text threads, a plan to escape the clamor of city life and reconnect with nature. They were equipped with food that smelled of grilled meats, tents that had stubborn zippers, and an old-fashioned map that Mark insisted was more reliable than his smartphone. What had started as a backdrop of chirping crickets and rustling leaves became the horizon of their fate. They arrived just before twilight. The sun slipped out of sight, surrendering the vast forest to the encroaching darkness. The towering pines loomed over them, silhouetted against the fading light, a magnificent yet intimidating sight. Lisa and Jennifer set about pitching the tents, their laughter echoing through the grove, while Mark gathered wood for a fire. Tom took up a position on a large rock, staring out over the clearing, his brow furrowed as if he could sense something lurking beyond the benevolent facade of nature. As night blanketed the woods, the group settled around the fire, shadows dancing like spirits on the ground. The warmth was soothing, yet there was an unsettling chill in the air that had little to do with temperature. The conversation ebbed and flowed, tales from childhood mixed with cackles of laughter. They boasted of camping glory, of past evenings spent under the stars. Lisa recalled a time when, under the glowing moonlight, she'd been haunted by the feeling of being watched. She dismissed the memory with a chortle, unaware that the forest was listening, hungry for fear. Hours passed, and with the hour growing late, an unnatural stillness descended over the woods, almost palpable. The laughter waned. Tortillas became quiet whispers. They shuffled uncomfortably as a sudden gust of wind sent shivers down their spines. The trees whispered too, although their secrets were beyond the realms of human comprehension. Then it came, a soft rustling from within the depths of the woods, low but unmistakable. The fire crackled to life with newfound urgency, its flames casting tall shadows against the trees. "It's probably just a deer or something," Mark said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. But it wasn't a deer. A guttural growl echoed from somewhere deep within the forest, dark and menacing. It thudded against their eardrums, each pulse causing their hearts to race. Tom was the first to stand, squinting into the darkness beyond the firelight. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice low. They all nodded, eyes wide, fear palpable as the chill of primal instinct gripped their hearts. "Let's not freak out," Jennifer suggested, her voice trembling as she glanced into the depths of the black surrounding them. But it was too late. As they peered into the abyss, something had emerged, silently, just beyond the edges of the flickering firelight, obscured by shadow, yet utterly tangible. A pair of eyes blinked awake, glinting like shards of ice against the trees, brimming with predatory hunger. A howl shivered the air, sending a wave of dread crashing over them. The friends jumped up instinctively, the sound tearing through the serene haven, shattering the illusion of safety. "Run!" shouted Mark as he grabbed the flashlight, the beam slicing through darkness like a knife. They scattered, each of them bolted into the depths of the forest, their laughter replaced by screams and heavy breaths, clawing at their throat. The nights in this seemingly peaceful wilderness twisted and molded into something malignant and terrifying, something that thrived on their fear. Frantic, they sprinted through the underbrush, branches whipping against their skin, the moonlight overtaken by the demon's shadows. Lisa, trailing behind, stumbled and fell, her knees scraping against the rough earth. A chilling growl slithered into her ear as she pressed against the damp ground, heart pounding like the drum of despair. She looked over her shoulder. The creature was close, an amalgamation of bone and darkness, twisted and gnashing its teeth, hunting her as surely as a wolf hunts prey. "Lisa!" Mark yelled, panic lacing his voice. He had turned back, the flashlight beam shaking wildly in his grip as he fought against the paralysis of disbelief. Each time the light flickered over the clearing, the creature writhed in shadow, weaving among the trees, a ghostly hunter unfurling its horrific form with every flash. They regrouped at an old ranger cabin. It was barely standing, the door hanging ajar like the mouth of a monstrous maw, waiting to consume them. They stumbled inside, hearts racing as they swung the door shut. The air inside was thick with age and decay, making their throats constrict as they fumbled with a rotten table, barricading the entrance. In their eyes, fear was reflected tenfold. They caught their breaths in the dim light, scanning the cabin for safety. But shadows twisted in the corners. Something crawled just out of sight. "Where is Tom?" Jennifer cried out, fear gripping her tighter than the darkness enveloping them. Panic surged anew. They called out for him, voices echoing through the stillness, until the only answer they received was the whisper of the wind through broken windows. Finally, from the shadows of the cabin, a sound drew their attention. A ferocious howl ripped through the air, filling the dark with palpable dread. "Let's go," shouted Mark, his heart hammering against his ribs as he pushed toward the cabin door. But just as they turned the handle, the darkness enveloped them. The wolf-like creatures, fast and silent, surrounded them, clouding their senses with the smell of rot and ruin. They had come closer than ever, their eyes bathing the cabin in an eerie glow, burning deeper than the last embers of their dying fire. One lunged, jaws snapping inches from Jennifer's face, sending her screaming back into the solace of shadows. "Hide! Hide!" screamed Mark as if it could avert the inevitable. They scattered once again as the creatures clawed at the cabin walls, forcing their way through. Each thud against the wood reverberated through the floorboards, a death knell marking their gathering doom. As they fled into the depths of the cabin, splitting from one another, they accidentally left behind their portal to safety. And in those last moments, nothing mattered except evading the haunting cries of the creatures pursuing them, echoing through the wood as they hunted, celebrating the thrill of the chase, turning their camping adventure into a magnificent horror haunted at every turn. With the last flickering lights of hope extinguished, reality frayed like an old rope, unraveling into the agonizing void. Darkness reigned as the pack closed in, hungry and relentless, ensuring nothing would ever remain of the friends or their laughter in that cursed forest. The echo of their last cries was swallowed by the stillness, a spectral reminder of the price of curiosity in the face of nature's hidden terrors. The shadows within. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, a journey to shake off the mundane and the expected. Alex had meticulously planned every detail, from the playlists that would echo through the car to the stops they would make at quaint diners along the highway. Yet, as fate would have it, their enthusiasm crumbled like the rusted frame of their car when it sputtered and died on a desolate stretch of road. "What the hell?" Aaron exclaimed, as the engine let out a wheezing gasp. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in ominous shades of crimson, which felt like a warning sign. There were no other vehicles in sight. The distant landscape was void of life, and all that encircled them was an unsettling hush, the kind that clung to the skin like a damp chill. "We should probably check for a phone signal or walk for help," Jane suggested, her voice a wary tremor against the encroaching twilight. But before they could formulate a plan, they spotted something unusual. A house, looming awkwardly amidst the barren expanse, its silhouette etched against the dying light. "It'll have a landline, right?" Alex offered, shuffling out from the driver's seat, determined to salvage the trip. Reluctantly, the others piled out, a mix of apprehension and tired resolve settling amongst them. As they approached, the house revealed itself, as a dilapidated relic from a forgotten time. Wooden beams warped with age, and the windows gaped like hollow eyes that had witnessed innumerable stories of despair. The air was thick with decay, a pungent reminder that life once thrived here, but was now suffocated beneath layers of neglect. "This is definitely not safe, you guys," Julia murmured, instinctual warnings clawing at her mind. But solid logic gave way to an errant flicker of adventure. After all, what was a little danger when wrapped in the cloak of camaraderie? Inside, the creaking floorboards announced their arrival. Dust particles danced in the shafts of fading light, swirling like the lingering memories of those who once roamed here. Each room they explored unveiled a shard of existence. Tattered wallpaper adorned with a forgotten floral pattern. Cracked mirrors reflecting shadows that seemed to extend just a moment too long. "I don't like this place." Erin's voice wavered as she peered into what was once a child's bedroom. A small bed stood unmade, its sheets stained and torn. Toys lay scattered, lifeless relics of a childhood abruptly ended. Each object teeming with a sorrow that was palpable. "It's just an old house," Alex shrugged, but even he struggled to mask the dread pooling in his stomach. The house, with its air of malice, pressed in on them, as if it harbored secrets venomous enough to suffocate. As night fell, the energy within the house shifted. The darkness grew denser, wrapping around them, consuming the last vestiges of courage. They gathered in the decaying living room, jagged furniture rustling under their shifting weight. Laughter from earlier morphed into nervous giggles, tales of past scares shared as a way to combat the encroaching chill. But as the clock struck 10, an unsettling sound cleaved the air, a whisper that swirled around them, lacing through their conversations like an insidious vine. "Did you hear that?" Julia's eyes darted, fear showing its fangs. But as swiftly as the sound emerged, it faded. They questioned their own minds, convinced it merely echoed from fatigue. Yet deeper within the embrace of the house, something else stirred. Unknown to the friends, malevolent eyes watched them from the shadows. From the very walls that could have stood witness to countless murders, monstrous entities began to ignite, a breed of hunters born from darkness. As the night stretched, a dreadful tension coiled tighter within the room. One by one, the group succumbed to the unnerving ambiance, retreating to makeshift corners for rest, while a sinister chill crept through the air like a lurking predator. Julia was the first to regain consciousness, an impulse born of instinct, urging her to seek out the source of the haunting whispers. She moved silently through the corridors, clutching a torch with shaky hands, illuminating fragments of the past. Photos hung crooked on the wall's each face, a reminder of lives disrupted by violence. Shadows of history saturated in cruelty. "Guys, get up," she shrieked, shaken from her reverie as she stumbled upon a room, its door ajar, hinting at chaos from within. The others limped into her call, bleary-eyed and half-hearted. Weariness had tethered them, a tension that heavy breaths couldn't dissolve. Within that room, as the shadows morphed and coalesced, the truth erupted. Laughing faces materialized, haunting them with live memories of their last moments. Each laugh a knife, slicing through their resolve. "Welcome to your grave," a hoarse voice reverberated, echoing grotesquely within the walls, as towering figures emerged from the inky shadow. The friends stood frozen, the imminent danger forcing them into a reality they couldn't escape. They broke into a sprint, desperately searching for exits that seemed to shift and morph with the shadows. "This way!" Erin screamed, the spiraling sense of dread now palpable as one of the figures lunged forward, a grotesque mask adorned with dark intentions. With frantic cheers narrowly masking their fear, they darted into the sprawling darkness of the house, ambushed by malevolence around every corner. Each door they opened seemed to lead them into a deeper labyrinth, pursuing death lurking just beyond every threshold. The walls closed in further. They stumbled upon remnants of diaries, ink-stained pages that screamed of terror, from accounts of families who had vanished, leaving only echoes of their screams ingrained in the rafters. "We have to stick together," Julia shouted, panic pooling beneath her skin. They clinched one another in a desperate attempt to quell the quiet chaos threatening to consume them whole. But even that promise of unity began to fray as the darkness toyed with their minds. The house feasted on their doubts, their fears. One by one they succumbed, nerves fraying until a single decision splintered them apart. In a whirlwind of confusion, they fought through separating shadows, only to be stunned by the terrifying revelation that they had become prey, their strengths twisted into weaknesses. Erin had vanished first, her terrified screams echoing in the distance as one of the hunters emerged from the shadows, dragging her shrieking form into the depths. "Erin, no!" Alex's voice rasped, tears binding him to the heart-wrenching horror that unfolded. The sense of sweat and fear melded with dread, and with it came impending madness driven by raw terror. One by one, they began to realize that escape did not lie within their own agency. It was nigh impossible to evade the hunters that had become as familiar to the house as its very walls. The night painted horror in a vibrant palette, faces of friends becoming unrecognizable as despair seeped deeper into their souls. A nightmare stretched on, fracturing bonds and imploding echoes of laughter that once filled the car on the long journey. And as the dawn broke reluctantly, the shadows withdrew, leaving nothing but silence and blood-stained memories. The abandoned house returned to its stillness, waiting anew for the next group of unsuspecting wanderers. Beneath the unraveling remnants of courage, the house devoured fear. Every heartbeat in the darkness could beckon it anew, crafting a cruel cycle, while in the back of their minds whispered the age-old lesson. The desolation of evil waits in the places we least suspect. The tenants of Willowdale Apartments. When Lily and Mark first saw the sign for Willowdale Apartments, it seemed like fate. The towering brick building loomed ahead, an inviting glow radiating from its antique lanterns. The couple's previous housing situations were mundane at best. A cramped studio downtown, too many roommates, and the dull hum of city life that always threatened to swallow them whole. Here, in Willowdale, everything felt different. The rent was surprisingly low for the area, and they envisioned cozy evenings spent on the balcony that overlooked the quiet street, the stars twinkling like wishes around them. However, upon moving in, a creeping sense of unease began to settle beneath their excitement, unveiling the layers. It started with the neighbors. They met them one by one as they moved their boxes up the creaking stairs, each encounter tinged with an odd flavor of awkwardness. The elderly couple on the third floor, Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher, spoke in hushed tones, their eyes flicking nervously toward their apartment door as they offered Lily a plate of molasses cookies that misshaped in grotesque, greasy globs. "You're going to love it here," Mrs. Fletcher said, shadows dancing in the corners of her mouth. "But be careful at night. The streets can get hauntish." As they settled in, evenings unfolded into a bizarre tapestry, woven from the whispers and laughter drifting from one door or another. The couple often speculated about the other tenants, each harboring little quirks that stood out in stark relief. The unusual gatherings. On the second floor, there was a tattooed man named Vince, who often grinned when you passed him in the hallway, his bared teeth shining in a predatory manner. His ex-girlfriend reportedly vanished without a trace. That laugh echoed in Lily's mind long after they'd part ways, sending shivers down her spine. Then there was Macy, an intriguing woman with a soft voice, who always appeared at odd hours, carrying trash bags that seemed heavier than they should be. She once invited them for dinner, her kitchen well lit, and a grotesque array of meat displayed like a feast fit for a king. But she never did mention where the meat came from. Days turned into weeks, and little did they know how deep the weeds had rooted. The dark reveal. It wasn't until a forgotten Thursday that they stumbled upon the grisly truth. One rainy evening, Lily was trapped in the confines of her apartment, interrupted by a loud scream that sliced through the veil of rain pounding on the windows. Her heart raced as Mark rushed toward the door, the ominous echo of another occupant's cry reverberating in the hallway. What started as a casual night between the two spiraled them into a nightmarish reality. As Lily and Mark peered through the peephole, they were drawn to the violent shadows, erupting through the light streaming out from beneath the door to Vince's apartment. It was a rhythmic thumping, almost resembling a muffled heartbeat, mingling eerily with the storm's growl. The first impression was merely nerve-wracking, but when a faint trickle emerged from beneath the door, like blood seeping through a wound, dread spilled into their veins. In a moment of reckless urgency, driven by curiosity that morphed into horror, they forced the door open. A musky odor clung to the air like a forgotten secret. Inside, the gruesome reality unfolded. The walls were covered in fragments of photographs, images of missing children, lost pets, and strangers long gone. An array of tools littered the floor, traces of blood coating their handles, each one gleaming beneath the dim light. Vince stood in the middle, a sick grin plastered across his face as he quickly disposed of the remnants of his latest victim, a neighbor from the first floor, whose scent still lingered like a forgotten perfume. Witness of the unimaginable, panicking, Lily and Mark staggered back, stumbling over the threshold of their sanctuary. They thought of running down the stairs, of alerting the authorities, but it was too late. As Vince turned toward them, the darkness in his eyes consumed the glimmer of humanity that once dwelled. "Oh, you didn't hear?" This is a neighborhood where relationships are built on trust. His laugh sliced through the air, sharp as the blades they found scattered around the room. Another door creaked open behind them, and from the shadows emerged the Fletchers, holding glistening knives that danced ominously beneath the flickering lights. The realization clawed at Lily and Mark, an uninvited truth unfurling like a deadly flower. Their entrance into Willowdale wasn't through chance. It was a gateway into a twisted community founded on the very fabric of carnage, where trust and companionship thrived on blood. The end of innocence. As the realization sunk in, the couple slipped back toward the darkness of their perils. No one escaped Willowdale. Every warning about the woods beyond the neighborhood, the utterings of haunted stories had been true. By the time another storm would pass through, another pair of new tenants would find themselves on the forefront of the whispers, stepping into the trap they'd once found too charming. The only solace was the dim hope that their screams would join the echoes of the countless souls just out of reach, the path of their innocence forever lost in the shadows of their beloved building. Waking Nightmare, a fugitive's tale. In a quaint town, nestled between the folds of mountains and kissed by the lull of the ocean, Abigail Parker lived a life most could only dream of. Her days began with warm sunlight spilling through her window, illuminating her immaculate apartment, adorned with soft hues and familiar smiles that echoed moments of joy. She had nurturing friends, a stable job as a graphic designer, and a budding romance with Daniel, a kind-hearted poet who adored every detail of her existence. However, one particular morning, the veil of her perfect life was brutally torn apart. As Abigail rifled through the sea of sheets, the sharp chorus of her alarm sang out the time. But it wasn't the familiar chime she awaited. It was raw, dissonant, a harbinger of chaos to come. Abruptly, she jolted upright, her heart pounding as her surroundings morphed before her eyes. The room felt alien, the walls a cracked and peeling gray, the air thick with an acrid odor of dust and decay that suffocated her senses. "What the hell?" she gasped, her voice echoing in the emptiness. The quilts beneath her were heavy and stained with an unsettling suggestion of neglect. A frayed lamp flickered in the corner, casting demon-like shadows that danced malevolently against the wall. Abigail blinked and her eyes widened as she stumbled to her feet, trying to shake free the nightmarish fog that clouded her mind. The reality she had awoken in felt wrong. Everything she had known was swallowed by a peculiar silence, as if life had seeped away from the very essence of her existence. Glancing toward the grimy window, she peeked outside to find the street bathed in shadows, a decrepit hush blanketing the neighborhood. No children laughed, no birds sang. To unravel the mystery, she padded to the door, an instinct whispering for her to flee. As soon as her fingers brushed the cold, rusted knob, a piercing thump echoed behind her. Abigail spun around, terror gripping her. The world quaked with every knock, as if something, or someone, was desperate to breach her sanctuary. Nausea grappled at her throat. Pushing against the door, she darted out into the unmistakably sinister streets, her heart thundering in her chest. Everything was different. At first glance, the town was similar. Yet, upon approaching familiar landmarks, nameless dread clawed at her mind. They were not the same. The bakery that once radiated the smell of freshly baked bread lay crumbling and burned. The vibrant flowers she used to adore were replaced by twisted vines that seemed to grasp at her ankles as she fled. Then the reality of her situation began to unfold in layers. She knew she was no longer just Abigail Parker. She was someone else entirely here, a fugitive. A newspaper clipping caught her eye, half buried in the filth. Woman on the run. Abigail Parker, suspected of drug trafficking and arson. Shock numbed her brain like an anesthetic, her mouth going dry as she struggled to absorb the words. "Mom, where are you?" she murmured, but nothing answered, and a piercing bark echoed down the street. They were coming for her. With instinct overriding her logic, she sprinted into the alley, her breath shaky and frantic, as if an unseen predator was on her tail. No pursuit echoed behind her, yet an overwhelming sensation gripped her heart like a vice. Someone was watching her from the shadows. Panic settled in tight coils within her, forcing her to stumble through a haze of muddied memories in an effort to regain control over her situation. Abigail sensed the weight of flesh just behind the faded columns of crumbling stone buildings. Whispers swirled, indistinguishable voices coaxing her toward a darkness both familiar and terrifying. It felt intimately threatening, yet unknown. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the world in a haunting glow, she found refuge in an abandoned warehouse. The skeletal structure groaned with the wind's complaints, empty bottles littering the floor like remnants of broken dreams. She collapsed against the wall, trying to form a plan that felt utterly impossible. Hours passed, but the darkness seeped deeper into the corners of her mind. Her hand shook as she rifled through her pocket, only to find a crumpled photograph of her, and Daniel smiling, the last remnant of the woman she'd been. The woman who had loved and been loved. Then the door creaked on rusted hinges and she froze. A tall silhouette loomed in the doorway, backlit by the bleeding moonlight, and the fear cascading through her was primal. It felt as if the very essence of despair had manifested into a grotesque figure. "Come out, Abigail," it called, the voice smooth as silk, yet heavily laced with malice. "You can't hide. You're a criminal now." She mangled her fingers through her hair, wild thoughts racing. She was not a criminal, but in this world, she had committed unthinkable acts. Panic surged once more, and with it came clarity. In an attempt to escape an unseen horror, she stumbled through the back exit of the warehouse and into a barren field. The only sound was the wind around her as it whispered secrets she could neither comprehend nor escape. Hitching her breath, she ran, tears pouring down her cheeks. She would find a way back to her life, back to the sunlight that painted the walls of her apartment in golden hues. She had to. The moon cast a lonely light, and Abigail's heart raced like a drum, as if destiny itself self-sought her out. Each step was a pact with the unknown, a narrative unfolding, a fight for survival. Suddenly, her feet caught on something, and she tumbled to the ground. The wind knocked from her lungs. A graveyard loomed before her, headstones leaning eerily like an audience from a tableau of despair, a testament to the souls lost in the recesses of the night. Facing the unspeakable, she clawed at the earth, recoiling at what she unearthed. In that very moment, she came face to face with the truth. Abyss stared back at her from within the cold earth. The familiar voice whispered her name again, revealing the weight of her own past battles, parasitically gnawing at her spirit. Only through sacrifice can you find your way back, Abigail, it taunted, raising an unsettling chill that made her bones shiver. Her understanding of humanity has blurred to the brink, her identity fractured like fragile glass. The line between the fugitive and the innocent blurred beyond recognition. The voice transformed, morphing into echoes of laughter she had known, her friends, her family. In that moment, Abigail realized the cruel twist of fate at play. She wasn't just a fugitive escaping justice. She was a perpetrator of her own perfect reality that had been living like a lie for too long. And here was the reckoning, a chance to choose. But as darkness loomed overhead, enveloping the graveyard in shadows deeper than any night, Abigail felt an unspeakable force drawing closer. In her heart, she knew that if she didn't claim her own truth, the darkness would claim her instead. And perhaps, just perhaps, in navigating this terrifying new reality, she had the opportunity to uncover the shattered pieces of her very soul. Through the haze of horror, she felt the undeniable urge to fight, to not just return to the life she'd known, but to eradicate the very secrets that had led her to this nightmarish fate. As the contours of reality twisted around her like sinister vines, Abigail Parker accepted the challenge. The horrific journey to redemption had begun. But she was no longer just running from consequences. She was fighting for the remnants of the life stolen from her, to emerge anew in the shadowy caverns of fate with a renewed, vengeful spirit. The Death Maze of Hemlock Grove. In the quaint little town of Hemlock Grove, the sun-drenched streets were lined with manicured gardens and charming picket fences. For generations, life had unfolded with a sweet simplicity. Neighbors exchanged pleasantries as children played tag on the green lawns. Autumn meant harvest festivals adorned with corn mazes, and winter brought forth snowmen and hot cocoa. But one ominous October, a sinister presence seeped into the town, shadowing its vibrant colors with a veil of dread, turning the beloved Hemlock Grove into a horrifying death maze. It all started with a whisper, an unsettling rumor that drifted like a heavy fog through the streets. The local paper reported disappearances, one after another. At first, it seemed like a cruel prank, a fear-mongering tactic to spike sales on a slow news day. But as names appeared on the obituaries, warm, familiar names, the lethargy morphed into something more palpable: terror. Lucy Rayner, a local school teacher whose laughter used to echo through the halls, found herself wrapped in the paranoia that gripped the town. She'd grown up in Hemlock Grove, and could not bear the unsettling thought of her beloved haven writhing in invisible chains. Contemplation consumed her. She sat on her porch, the cool autumn breeze caressing her cheeks, mulling over the idea that perhaps frivolous expectations of safety had turned naive. It was on a Sunday night that Lucy dared to venture near the town's edge, where the trees loomed like silent sentinels draped in moonlight. She recalled the old tales from her childhood, that the forest housed a darkness that could swallow the careless whole. Yet she pressed on, hope and fear battling within. As she stepped onto a rickety footbridge that traversed a shallow creek, a sudden rustle sent a sharp jolt through her veins. The bridge creaked under her weight, and she quickly turned, scanning the shadows, hoping for nothing. Just as she was about to dismiss the sound as nothing, a blood-curdling scream fractured the stillness. Lucy's heart raced as she stumbled back towards the main street, tripping over roots that seemed to rise like fingers grasping at her, reluctant to let her escape. Days turned into nights, and the weeks slipped by in a blurring haze of fear. The first victim had been Eric, the town mill worker, followed by Maria, the bakery owner. Their demises were hauntings that shelled out the facade of safety. Each victim was claimed by a trap, a mechanism that betrayed whispers of an exquisite, twisted craftsmanship. The town now pulsed with dread, dark, lurching shadows that seemed to know every secret. The authorities scrambled to uncover the perpetrator behind the tragedy. Every corner turned revealed a new puzzle, and with every life lost, the traps grew bolder and more complex. Iron fences emerged, snarled by razor wire that glinted wickedly in the dark. Entrances to the town were sealed by rusted gates that led into blind alleys where promises of escape lay just out of reach. Some claimed they had seen a figure, wrapped in tattered black, eyes glimmering with an insatiable hunger for chaos, vanish into the fog as quickly as it had appeared. With dread settling in her stomach like a stone, Lucy began to realize that the maze was not merely built of walls and traps. It burrowed deep under her skin, suffocating her very essence. She found herself trapped in a psychological torment. Her once idyllic lifestyle morphed into a chilling survival narrative. She began to isolate herself, avoiding conversations that turned to lives lost. The community, devastated and splintered, fell into silence. Rumors spiraled into paranoia, forging an unfeeling wall between neighbors who once indulged in innocent friendships. Every door felt locked to Lucy, and she began to question if it was the killer lurking beyond in shadows, or if her own emotions were blades in the dark. On the darkest night of the year, the town held a vigil. Red candles flickered in the biting wind, casting morbid shadows that danced against the terrified faces of the townsfolk. It was then Lucy felt resurgence, a deep, burning need to unravel the truth. There were hints scattered like breadcrumbs, photographs left behind, symbols carved into tree trunks, a broken watch found on the banks of the river. She would not allow herself to succumb to fear, not while her friends were still lost. A decision formed in her mind, like steel bending around a fire, armed with flares and determination that flickered bright against the suffocating darkness. She plunged into the heart of the maze, the old forest. The trees, once a sanctuary echoing with laughter, now loomed ominously, their branches like veins that pulsed with malevolence. Each step on the crisp leaves echoed louder than the last, each sinister whisper of the past resurfacing into her present. Hours passed as the oxygen grew thin, her resolve stronger. She came upon a clearing where the murders seemed to draw life from despair, echoes of laughter transforming into haunting echoes. In the center lay a weathered stone altar, encrusted with remnants of bone and fragments of lives extinguished. The air was thick, charged with an energy that thrummed wildly under her skin. Its secrets, once locked away, teased at the edges of her consciousness, evoking ever-present horror. Perhaps the killer was among the living, narrowly concealed behind the familiar faces she had gazed upon with warmth. She searched frantically, the candle's glow flickering in her mind, a faint beam piercing the suffocating chasms of darkness. With a sudden surge, the ground shifted beneath her, revealing a trapdoor opening beneath a leafy carpet. Desperation fueled her, and Lucy descended into the depths, illuminating the darkness around her with the flare. The air grew colder as she stepped into the crypt-like chamber, eerily reminiscent of the town's deserted buildings. Words scrawled in red, tangled in the past, forever trapped. To her horror, she realized this serial killer was performing a twisted ritual, binding their lives through sacrifice to the darkness that enveloped Hemlock Grove. The altar before her had woven together the fates of every life claimed, each murder feeding an ancient evil that had begun to awaken. As she turned to flee, the weight of history bore down fiercely. A figure emerged, face hidden beneath layers of shadows. Why do you seek to leave? Don't you see? This hunt brings life to the very heart of our town. The figure droned, voice resonating with a chilling familiarity. The realization struck her hard. She stood in the presence of someone she once called a friend. In that moment, Lucy felt time fracturing, revealing memories soaked in laughter, laced with betrayal. The smiles she had cherished turned suddenly grotesque, capturing the promise of childhood innocence warped by remorse. In a desperate struggle, Lucy lunged, her spirit screaming against the confines of both her mind and the killer's deception. Traps clanged around them, each echo feeling like the bell tolling for lives lost to madness. With one final desperate attempt, she managed to wrestle away a dagger, plunging it into the heart of the darkness itself. The earth erupted with shrieks of rage and terror. The energy trembled as the roots of evil recoiled before her act of courage. The forest, that had once been a maze of despair, revealed its true nature. The trees wept, roots twisting and shifting to free the trapped souls, and images of vibrant autumn colors seeped back into the surrounding. With a last breath consumed by the very darkness that threatened to engulf her, Lucy survived. The morning sun broke over Hemlock Grove again, life returning in slow motion as colors bled back into their world. However, change permeated every raindrop that fell, whispering softly against her ears. The forest was no longer a haunting wilderness, but an emblem of freedom, won through sacrifice. A memory that rested on the threshold of both hope and horror. As she emerged from the tangled remnants, it was not with the euphoria of survival. Instead, a somber weight settled within her. The past would forever linger, a haunting reminder of the killer's shadow that could once again wrap itself around the town. Fresh wounds bared, the town had transformed, carved into collective remembrance. Memories etched into blood, teaching them that peace is often a fragile illusion in a world curled tight with fear.